Chosen one, welcome, extraordinary souls, warriors of light, quiet storms. You didn't stumble here by accident. No, you were summoned. Because the truth is, you carry something they can't name, something they can't copy, and something they sure as hell can't handle. That calm in your chest, that unshakable glow in your spirit, that's not ordinary, that's rare, that's sacred, and it scares people who've built their whole lives on noise. You already know what I'm talking about. You walk into a space, and suddenly the temperature shifts. Eyes dart. Energy gets weird. Somebody starts squirming, cracking knuckles, running their mouth for no reason. Why? Because your presence exposes what they're trying to hide, and you didn't even open your mouth. Tonight, or today, or whenever you're reading this, we're going in. Deeper than the cliches, beyond the cute quotes. No sugarcoating. No dimming your shine to make it palatable. This is a celebration of you, the real you, the one who doesn't need to raise their voice to make the walls shake, the one who's been underestimated, misunderstood, and yet keeps walking with grace that makes liars sweat and masks slip. So buckle up, chosen ones. Let them glare. Let them whisper. Let them choke on their own projections while you sip your peace like fine wine. Because tonight, we're not just pulling back the curtain, we're tearing it down. This is your reminder that your energy is your power, your calm is your rebellion, and your presence is your crown. Let's get to it. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. There's a quiet gravity some carry that disrupts every pretense around them. Without raising a hand or a word, they dismantle illusions just by being present. No need for explanations. No need to tangle themselves in theatrics. Simply standing firm is enough to disorient those who depend on facades. It isn't aggression, and it isn't withdrawal. It's something sharper. The unmistakable weight of someone who has already wrestled with themselves and emerged whole. That kind of composure confounds people who have built their identity on noise and approval. They feel cornered without understanding why. Every glance becomes heavy. Every silence feels loaded, because in that stillness, all their concealed flaws seem to surface. Even without confrontation, their confidence begins to splinter. Their rehearsed charm falters. Inside, they're scrambling to maintain control, confused as to why they feel so exposed when no battle has even begun. Some start to fidget, to find faults where there are none, to grow defensive over imagined slights. They misread calm as judgment, yet what they fear is not being judged but being seen. Seen without the decorations they wear for the world. And that sight terrifies them because they have never stood in front of themselves so unguarded. It's not the still one's voice that disturbs them, but the quiet certainty that radiates from them like an unspoken challenge. They cannot distract, cannot distort, cannot win in a game the other refuses to play. That refusal echoes louder than any argument. It lingers with them long after, replaying like a question they cannot answer. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. And beneath all their irritation, they already know why. Nothing was said, yet everything was revealed. They leave unsettled, not because they were defeated by another, but because they stumbled over the truth in themselves. Some confuse composure with fragility, assuming restraint means there's nothing beneath it. They misread silence as surrender, thinking the absence of fire is the absence of strength. But this calm comes from walking through places that would have swallowed them whole. It's not born of fear. It's proof of having endured storms without turning into one. This unsettles them in ways they can't name. They try to poke holes, provoke, and pull reactions, believing they can drag that stillness down into the noise where they feel at home. But the quiet denies them what they crave. An opponent, a spark, a crack. They escalate, growing reckless as if trying to ignite what refuses to burn. Their own chaos grows heavier as they realize nothing they throw finds purchase. That kind of steadiness disarms them because it isn't indifferent, it's deliberate. It's a line drawn not with words, but with presence, a refusal to lower into their dust. Every jab only reveals more of their own restlessness, while the calm remains untouched. This frustrates them more than any argument could. They sense it now, that this quiet doesn't need to prove itself, doesn't need permission, doesn't need validation. It becomes clearer as their own tension builds. The person they try to rattle isn't standing still because they're paralyzed, but because they've already untangled themselves from the games. And that freedom becomes unbearable for those still trapped in their own loops. They watch, realizing that no manipulation, no bait, no noise can pierce through a peace they never learned to hold. And when nothing they do seems to matter, the real confrontation begins. Not between them and the calm, but between them and themselves. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. There's a kind of presence that carries a weight no one bestowed. It moves through rooms without asking for recognition, yet bends the air around it. People who spent years collecting symbols of importance, titles, alliances, accolades, find themselves inexplicably overshadowed by it. They can't explain why. The authority in it feels unfamiliar because it wasn't earned in their way. It wasn't bargained for or constructed. It emerged unseen, shaped by nights and trials no audience witnessed. That quiet command doesn't announce itself, but it cannot be ignored. To those who measure worth by applause and visibility, it's unnerving. They feel it before words are spoken, an unshakable knowing that cuts through their pretenses. It isn't performance. It isn't ambition. It's the residue of someone who has come to know themselves so completely that no one else's map applies. Those who've built their power on appearances sense this and feel it destabilize what they thought was solid. It isn't meant to diminish anyone, but it does illuminate the fragility of what they clutch. That kind of inner authority stands beyond reach because it wasn't handed down. It was forged quietly, away from their gaze. They try to measure it, to understand it, but it resists their metrics entirely. It doesn't compete because it never entered their race to begin with. And that realization leaves them disoriented, seeing their own reflections in a light they can't control, haunted by the truth that some things cannot be imitated or contained. There's a kind of presence that unsettles without lifting a finger, one that refuses to be baited, that won't descend into petty exchanges just to feel superior. That refusal is more than disinterest. It dismantles their illusions of control. To those who thrive on eliciting reactions, silence becomes unbearable. They mistake composure for indifference, failing to see it for what it is, liberation. Every attempt to provoke falls flat. Every insult meets a wall that doesn't crumble. Their tactics falter because their sense of power only exists when someone else grants it. But here, nothing is given. The calm stands firm, not because it lacks the ability to fight, but because it no longer finds meaning in the fight itself. Those who depend on chaos find this kind of detachment intolerable. It starves them of the emotional fuel they've always relied on. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. They throw words like stones, but nothing shatters. Instead, they spiral, inventing scenarios, twisting stories, just to soothe the bruised ego left in the void of that stillness. In the quiet, their inner noise grows louder. They want a confrontation to justify their anger, a reaction to validate their schemes. Yet none comes, and in that space, they begin to see how little sway they truly have. No longer does the need to be heard, to defend, to prove, take hold. That version of self, the one who clung to validation, has vanished, leaving behind someone they can't manipulate, can't reach, can't unsettle. This quiet isn't submission, it's a declaration. In a world frantic for recognition, choosing stillness is its own form of victory. And as they flail for control, they discover the unsettling truth. Nothing threatens an inflated ego more than someone who simply walks away untethered. There's also a quiet rebellion in not desiring what others worship. While they scramble for eyes to watch them, voices to praise them, and measures to mark their worth, this indifference is unshakable. The things they chase, applause, comparison, domination, are rendered meaningless when no one else plays along. They can't comprehend how someone remains unshaken by what consumes them. To them, life is a stage and everyone must perform. But the refusal to even step into the spotlight exposes just how hollow the applause really is. They throw provocations like bait, hoping to spark envy or draw someone into their contests. But the disinterest only deepens the cracks in their illusions. It confuses them how one can simply decline to sit at their table, to ignore the games they've convinced themselves are life itself. That detachment becomes a mirror, reflecting how much of their worth is tangled in things that don't hold weight beyond the surface. It's not competition, it's transcendence. That kind of evolution unsettles, because it whispers of freedom they cannot mimic. In their confusion, they watch and search for evidence of insecurity, hoping to confirm their belief that everyone must crave what they crave. But the absence of need reveals the falseness of their idols. Moving through life without the hunger for validation dismantles the elaborate scaffolding they've built around themselves. Without raising a voice or striking a blow, the quiet shows just how exhausting and empty their pursuit has been all along. The peace they can't comprehend becomes their undoing, not because it attacks them, but because it makes clear they've been at war with themselves the entire time. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. There's a kind of determination that unsettles everyone who has made distraction their home. That unwavering focus cuts through the noise without even trying. Not because it challenges them directly, but because it reminds them how scattered they've become. While they are tangled in gossip and spectacle, someone else is quietly weaving something real, piece by piece. That steadiness doesn't clamor for approval, yet it draws every eye. They watch, puzzled, because the silence looks like absence to them, but it's actually presence. Each step taken without fuss highlights their own restless wandering. They craft appearances of progress while staying in place. Yet someone who stays centered outpaces them with ease. And that realization bites. That consistency is more disruptive than any shout. That quiet work is sharper than any display. Even without words, the commitment becomes a mirror they can't escape. Choosing depth over attention, patience over recognition, they see how their own efforts have been scattered like sand. Every small choice to stay the course feels to them like an unspoken accusation. While they perform movement, someone else lives momentum, and it gnaws at them to know that none of their frantic running has closed the distance. In the stillness, they start to notice what they've been avoiding. That focus unsettles because it asks nothing, yet proves everything. Every ignored insult, every sidestepped trap, every quiet victory shows what they could have done if they weren't chasing shadows. Without lifting a finger, the one who keeps moving forward leaves behind a trail that becomes impossible to ignore. That kind of direction becomes a quiet reckoning for anyone who never chose their own. There's also something deeply unnerving about being in the presence of someone who embodies what others merely imitate. Not because they speak of it, but because they carry it in the way they stand, in how they endure, in what they no longer need to explain. Those who merely rehearse the language of growth sense the difference immediately. It exposes every shortcut they took. The weight of authenticity can't be borrowed, and that is what disturbs them most. While they curated their image with polished words and visible declarations, someone else vanished into their own depths and returned with something real, something no one else could stage. That kind of quiet truth rearranges a room before a single word is spoken. They feel it, even if they pretend not to. The way their practiced smiles feel brittle in its presence. The way their borrowed confidence falters when met with someone who truly lived what they only recite. It's not an accusation, but it reveals everything without trying. They wear masks so well that they even convince themselves, until someone enters who never wore one at all. What cuts them most is not just that someone overcame, but that they did it without an audience, without applause, without spectacle, without pretending. The scars weren't turned into a costume. The victories weren't for show. They simply became what others only perform. And in a world where illusion passes for substance, that kind of quiet reality unravels every performance without ever striking it down. There's an invisible barrier around certain souls that nothing corrosive can penetrate. No matter how much blame is hurled, how much manipulation is disguised as care, how many twisted stories are planted, nothing latches on. That frustrates those who thrive on emotional entanglement because they expect every boundary to eventually bend under pressure. Yet this presence remains unmarked, not detached out of apathy, but unassailable from deep cleansing that already stripped away every hook they once used. Every attempt to implant guilt or confusion slides off, leaving them bewildered. They're used to finding cracks to pour into, insecurities to feed on, doubts to magnify. But here, the walls are smooth, the air too clear, and the ground too firm. They cannot find purchase. The battles they try to ignite never spark, because the kindling is gone. The quietness they face isn't emptiness, but evidence of someone who already mended their wounds and removed the bait. So their energy collapses back onto itself, circling in frustration. What was once fertile ground for their shadows is now barren to them, and the realization begins to sting. The games no longer work because the rules no longer apply. What they encounter now is a mirror that stays unstained, no matter what they throw. That kind of inner clarity becomes unbearable for them to stand in, and so they thrash, desperate to attach, finding nothing to cling to. There's no place left for their heaviness to rest. No hidden longing, no secret shame, no unhealed fractures for them to worm into. The peace they meet feels foreign, almost hostile to their dysfunction, because it denies them the ability to spill themselves into another. This lack of entry point leaves them floundering, not because they lost control over you, but because they never truly had it. There's also a quiet defiance in moving through life without chasing what others worship, where they exhaust themselves performing for attention and scrambling for approval. This presence stands still and lets the right doors open without strain. That self-assurance, calm yet magnetic, disturbs those who were taught to claw their way to belonging. It makes their strategies feel hollow when someone else achieves what they can't without the same exhaustion. To them it seems impossible that someone could attract connection, opportunity, and love without scheming, pandering, or adjusting their mask to fit the moment. They call it luck or arrogance, but deep down they know it comes from something they've never cultivated. They see someone who stopped pleading for scraps, who no longer molds themselves to be chosen, who refuses to twist into what the crowd wants, and it shakes them. They work tirelessly, building images, curating interactions, and yet their rewards feel fragile next to the quiet confidence of someone whose worth was never bartered. The difference cuts deeply because it exposes just how much they've been faking to keep their illusion alive. And though they won't say it, they envy the kind of certainty that cannot be faked, a gravity that draws what belongs and repels what doesn't. What they can't mimic is the foundation it rests on, the kind of internal work that stripped away desperation and made space for ease. They keep watching, hoping to catch a flaw, to prove it's an act, but the truth unsettles them. That calm isn't passive, it's power without a script. And in a world frantic to be noticed, nothing is more threatening than someone who simply stands, certain that what's theirs will never need to be chased. There's a quiet steadiness that unsettles those who can't feel whole without external validation, not because it flaunts itself, but because it simply exists without begging to be noticed. It doesn't bend to trends or scramble for timing. It moves on its own rhythm, and everything around it adjusts. That rhythm confuses those who believe worth must be performed. They stand there, eyes narrowed, wondering how someone who isn't demanding the stage somehow commands the room. Each choice is deliberate, yet free of calculation. No need for a performance or a parade. Yet even in stillness, it seems to draw what others spend years chasing. To those who have not yet healed, that presence feels heavy. They misread grace as ego because they have never seen peace that doesn't ask for applause. They label it arrogance because they can't recognize dignity when it isn't draped in theatrics. There is no loud announcement, no forced charm, only quiet confidence that doesn't shrink and doesn't loom. And that subtlety cuts deep for anyone who's built their identity on spectacle and competition. They spent their lives layering masks, stacking titles, polishing narratives, while someone else stripped it all away, endured the solitude, and came out carrying something authentic. That authenticity makes the air thick for those who've only practiced healing in words, but never lived it in their bones. This grace is not a weakness. It's restraint sharpened by experience, strength refined by scars, clarity that no longer wavers. It doesn't scream its power. It simply refuses to collapse for anyone's approval. That kind of presence rattles those who expected to see bitterness or desperation. Instead, they're met with softness that unsettles because it's real. What unsettles them most isn't superiority. It's the quiet proof that peace exists without their games. There's also an unspoken rebellion in refusing to join the endless sparring of fragile egos. They set their traps carefully, subtle barbs wrapped in false concern, questions disguised as kindness, little digs meant to provoke. But none of it lands. The silence that follows isn't indifference, it's wisdom. Once, they succeeded at pulling reactions, twisting emotions, keeping the cycle alive. But now, all their moves fall into empty space. That shift stings them deeper than any insult could. Not because harm was done, but because no harm was needed. The refusal to engage steals the air from their performance. Without an audience, the show collapses. What they don't understand is that this quiet refusal was earned through long nights of unraveling patterns, through choosing to stop pouring energy into hollow battles. Every attempt to hook falls short because the price of reacting is no longer worth it. They sense this change but can't name it, so they take it personally. It feels like a door closed to them, like a verdict on their value. And perhaps it is. The one who no longer plays has chosen peace over pain, and that choice unmakes the power dynamic they depended on. From a distance, they still watch, inventing new ways to spark conflict, with guilt, false apologies, even manufactured kindness. But none of it moves the one who's done with the dance. What remains is a kind of quiet sovereignty, a strength that no longer needs to prove itself in someone else's chaos. That kind of calm looks cold to those addicted to noise, but it is not cold. It is healed. And that healing was the last thing they expected to compete with. There is a kind of strength that becomes impossible to map because it's already been explored from the inside. They keep circling you, testing you, pressing at the edges to find the wound, the crack, the soft underbelly, but it never appears. They can't figure out why nothing rattles you anymore. Every attempt to provoke is met with quiet, with ease, with nothing they can use. That's because the hard work was already done where no one could see it. The shadows were faced, named, and embraced long before they tried to weaponize them. There's no performance of perfection, no false invincibility, just the quiet certainty of someone who has already stood in their own chaos and walked through it without hiding. What once could have been used to hurt you is now just part of you, impossible to shame or manipulate. You've sat with every flaw, every regret, every scar, and made them your own. Nothing remains for them to exploit. So when they reach for the old traps, they fall into empty air. The memories they thought would crush you don't even echo anymore. The stories they spin can't take hold because you already claimed them. And this terrifies them more than rage ever could. The way you stand, whole and unshaken, no longer at war with yourself. They've built their power on identifying weaknesses and twisting them into chains. But with you, nothing sticks. They find only calm where they expected chaos. They keep searching for the fault line and finding only solid ground. That kind of self-possession leaves them unmoored because the usual entry points don't exist anymore. You've already turned your pain into something they can't touch. And the unpredictability of that, the fact that they can't read you, can't move you, leaves them grasping at shadows. There's also a quiet revolution in simply letting go and walking away. They expected you to plead, to linger, to demand answers, to claw for closure. But instead, you just stopped. No dramatic farewell, no explanation, no storm of words, only absence. And in that absence, their illusion shattered. They thought their presence was indispensable to you, but you proved otherwise. And in that proof, you regained everything they tried to take. Their hold depended entirely on your need for reassurance, on your fear of solitude, on your hunger for approval. When you set all that down, their grip disintegrated. What they'd relied on, whispers of rejection, threats of exclusion, subtle power games, turned into nothing when you decided you no longer needed their permission to breathe. They don't know how to handle someone who stops playing. They keep throwing bait, testing your name, creating tension, but nothing comes back. That silence burns louder than any accusation because it makes one truth undeniable. You no longer belong to their orbit. They expected fury or desperation. What they got was indifference, a kind of peace so complete it collapses their entire scheme. And that's what frightens them most. Not that you fought back, but that you didn't need to. That you learned how to stand alone without fear, without their validation, without their chaos, without shrinking. You didn't dethrone them by force. You simply walked away and left their illusion to crumble under its own weight.